Ray Johnson wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked around the construction site. The construction of the Grand Rapids shopping center was well underway, and he was proud to be on the crew. Among the dozens of construction workers, he stood out for his meticulousness and attention to detail, qualities he'd developed over years of self-employment in his hometown of Riverdale, where every misstep was a cause for gossip. 40-year-old Ray was wiry, with skin tanned from constant outdoor work and calloused hands. Wrinkles in the corners of his eyes showed a man used to squinting from the sun and scrutinizing details. A small scar above his eyebrow dated back to his high school days, a memory of a fight when he'd stood up for Brad, his best friend. Stanley's foreman, a stocky man with a perpetual cigarette in his teeth, waved his hand in his direction, beckoning him over. "Nice job on the framing, Johnson. Keep up the good work." Ray nodded, feeling a surge of pride. This job was a real lifesaver for his family's budget. In Riverdale, a small town of only 4,000 people, orders were rare and paid modestly. Replacing Mrs. Robinson's rotten porch, fixing the roof at the parsonage, building a fence at the Jenkinses. All these jobs made it possible to make ends meet, but they did not give him confidence in the future. But once he had dreamed of more, his own construction company, a spacious house for Lisa, children playing in the yard. 16 years of marriage, and many dreams remained dreams. Children did not appear, despite all attempts. After the third miscarriage 5 years ago, doctors said there was virtually no chance. Lisa could not recover from this blow for a long time. Ray plunged into work, trying to provide his wife with at least material comfort, if he could not give her a child. He glanced at his watch. There were still 3 hours left until the end of his shift. With any luck with the bus, he'd make it in time for lunch. Maybe even stop by Lisa's cabin and get her some coffee. The thought of his wife brought a warm smile. All these years together, and he still thanked fate for meeting her. Lately, though, something had changed between them. Lisa had become aloof, pensive, as if immersed in some inner world of her own that he had no access to. Ray shook his head, pushing away anxious thoughts, and went back to work. In a week, he'd get his first paycheck here in Grand Rapids. It should be enough money to fix the roof on their house, and maybe even a small gift for Lisa. The New Look hair salon was on Riverdale's main street, between the drugstore and the grocery store. It was unusually crowded at this midday hour for customers at once, a full house by the standards of their town. Lisa Johnson was deftly wielding a pair of scissors, trimming the bob of Eleanor Simmons, the wife of the local pharmacist. 36 years old, her graceful hands still had the ease and confidence that had once helped her get a job at the salon. Her brown hair was gathered into a practical ponytail, revealing a thin face with expressive brown eyes that always held some underlying sadness. "Martha Wilson is getting a divorce," Eleanor chirped, looking curiously at the other women in the mirror. "They say her husband's been dating that new elementary school teacher for 6 months." Lisa nodded absent-mindedly, thinking of her own. In the 10 years she had been working in the salon, she had mastered the art of pretending to listen attentively to endless gossip, while completely disconnecting herself from the flow of words. Eleanor and her kind did not need an interlocutor. They needed a listener, the role of which Lisa played flawlessly. Sometimes it seemed to her that her whole life, the same game. The role of an ideal wife in a small town where everyone knows each other by name. The role of a friendly hairdresser who listens to any story with equal interest. The role of a woman satisfied with her fate, who does not aspire to anywhere. But once she dreamed of traveling, of seeing the world beyond the small towns, similar to each other, like 2 drops of water. The daughter of a military officer, she was used to constant moving, new places, new faces. The sedentary life in Riverdale sometimes suffocated her like a dress that was too tight. Of course, there was Ray, dependable, loving, sincere, a man who had built a whole world for her. But sometimes that world seemed too small, too predictable. Sometimes she wanted to break this mirror of ordinariness and step beyond it. "Lisa, are you listening to me?" Eleanor's voice brought her back to reality. "Of course," Lisa smiled professionally. "Go on, I'm just concentrating on the difficult part." The bell on the door jingled, and Cheryl Diaz, a paramedic for the local ambulance and Lisa's only real friend in this town, entered the parlor. Slim, with short dark hair and perpetually tired eyes, she sank into the waiting chair. Their friendship had begun when Cheryl was assisting Lisa after another miscarriage. That night, while Ray was filling out paperwork in the emergency room, Cheryl had held Lisa's hand and talked to her about things Lisa had never dared to talk about, even with her husband. "I'll wait," Cheryl said with one lip, and Lisa nodded, grateful for the breath of fresh air in the stifling atmosphere of gossip. Jenny's Bar was one of the few places of entertainment in Riverdale, with karaoke on Fridays, a local country band on Saturdays, and sports on the big screen on Sundays. But for Ray and Brad, Friday night at the bar was first and foremost a tradition that had been unbroken for nearly 20 years. They sat at a corner table with mugs of beer, a pool table next to them, waiting for their turn. Brad Cooper, a year younger than Ray, was the complete opposite of him. Loud, expressive, adventurous, and a lover of women. He'd never married, changed jobs like a glove until 5 years ago, when he opened a car wash on the entrance to town. Things were going neither well nor badly, but Brad was never discouraged. Another trait that distinguished him from Ray, who was always worried about the future. "So you're sure you're going to go?" Brad took a sip of his beer, looking at his friend carefully. "Yeah," Ray nodded. "The foreman's happy with my work, says there might even be a permanent position after these 2 weeks." "And what does Lisa think?" Ray hesitated, twirling the mug in his hands. "She's happy. Of course she's excited. It's good money, steady work. But the move," Brad leaned closer. "Is Lisa ready to move?" That was the question Ray had been asking himself for the last few days. He'd seen how Lisa was growing weary of small-town life. But Grand Rapids wasn't the New York or Los Angeles she'd once dreamed of. It's just a bigger city with a mall and a movie theater. "I think she'll realize it's better for both of us," Ray finally replied. "Besides, the decision hasn't been made yet. The main thing now is to make the 2 weeks work." "Your house." Brad suddenly changed the subject. "Is the roof still leaking?" "Yeah, over the bedroom," Ray sighed. "I was going to fix it before I left, but I ran out of time. We'll have to wait until we get back." "I could help," Brad offered. "See what's wrong? Maybe patch it up temporarily. I've got some free time next week." "Really?" Ray looked at his friend gratefully. "That would be great." Lisa had complained that the last rain had caused a stain in the bedroom. "No problem, buddy." Brad lifted his mug. "Here's to your new job." They clinked glasses, and Ray felt the heaviness of the last few days recede a little. It was nice to have a friend like Brad. A man he could always count on, who would never let him down. If only he knew what thoughts really lurked behind Brad's friendly smile. The rain drummed on the roof for the 3rd day. Lisa sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket with a book on her lap. Ray had left almost a week ago, and the house seemed empty and quiet. At first, this silence was even pleasant. You could watch your favorite movies, not cook dinner for a certain time, sleep in the middle of the bed, but gradually the loneliness began to press. The doorbell rang, snapping her out of her reverie. Brad stood on the doorstep, soaked to the skin, toolbox in hand. "Ray asked to see the roof," he said, smiling that boyish smile that always made Lisa's heart race. She let him in, and the coziness instantly returned to the house along with his casual chatter. Brad always had a way of filling a space with his presence. A loud voice, vivid emotions, stories he told as if he were directly involved in them, even if he heard them from someone else. "I'll make coffee," Lisa said, heading for the kitchen. She did her best to tidy up discreetly, fixing her hair, pulling on a homemade t-shirt that seemed to be Ray's and was too big for her. Somehow it seemed important now, to look good in front of Brad. When she returned to the living room with 2 cups of coffee, Brad had already taken off his wet jacket and laid out his tools on the coffee table. "I'll go up to the attic and see what the problem is," he said, taking the cup. "But to be honest, I don't think I can fix anything in this rain, except to assess the extent of the disaster." "Thank you for coming," Lisa thanked him sincerely. "There's already a second stain in the bedroom." "You know, in a way, this rain is a blessing," Brad said thoughtfully. "Otherwise, I'd never have found an excuse to stop by." Their gazes met, and Lisa felt goosebumps run down her spine. There was something in Brad's eyes that made her feel special, desirable, alive. Not the comfortable Lisa everyone was used to seeing, but the real Lisa with her dreams, her fears, her secret desires. "You can always just drop by," she said quietly, surprised at her own courage. "You're a friend of the family." "A friend of the family," Brad echoed, and Lisa could hear the bitterness in his voice. "Yes, of course." He finished his coffee and stood up. "Can you show me where the attic is?" Lisa led him up to the second floor, into a small hallway where the hatch to the attic was located. Brad pulled himself up on his arms and deftly climbed up. She heard his footsteps overhead for a few minutes. Then he came back down, covered in dust and cobwebs. "Not good news," he said, shaking himself off. "There's some rotten boards in there. We have to replace some of the purlins and re-roof that section of the roof. We can't do it in the rain, so we'll have to wait for good weather." "I see," sighed Lisa. "Well, we'll have to put buckets under the leaks." "I can come tomorrow if it stops raining," Brad suggested. "It's my day off." "I don't want to take your day off." Lisa shook her head. "You're not," Brad said softly. "I want to help. Besides," he smiled, "I like being here, with you." The last words hung in the air. Lisa felt the color rush to her cheeks. They were standing so close together in the cramped hallway that she could feel the warmth of his body, see every feature of his face, which suddenly seemed incredibly close to her. "Brad, she stammered, not knowing what to say. "It's okay," he said softly. "I understand. Ray's my best friend, and I've never—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't finish it. He didn't finish the sentence, but his eyes spoke more than words. In them, Lisa saw the same thing she felt, that strange, wrong but so strong pull, like a magnet, drawing them to each other against all rules and conventions. "Maybe we could watch a movie," Brad suddenly suggested, breaking the tension. "Since there was nothing we could do about the roof today, I have a new disc with me. I thought I'd watch it tonight." "I'd love to," Lisa agreed with relief. They returned to the living room, and Brad went to set up the DVD player, while Lisa went to the kitchen to get some popcorn. Her hands shook a little as she put the bag in the microwave. "What's going on with her? This is Brad, Ray's friend, a man she's known for 16 years. Why was it now that she was starting to notice how nice his hands were, how attractive his laugh sounded, how warm his gaze made her feel? When she returned to the living room with a bowl of popcorn, Brad was already sitting on the couch, the movie ready to watch. Lisa sat down next to him, trying to keep a decent distance between them. But as the plot progressed on the screen, she felt their shoulders touching, his hand casually touching her hand in the bowl of popcorn, his knee pressing against her knee. By the middle of the movie, Lisa could no longer focus on what was happening on the screen. All her attention was drawn to the man beside her, to his profile looming in the semi-darkness of the room, to his breathing, which seemed to be quickening. "Lisa," Brad called softly, turning toward her. She looked up at him, and in that moment all barriers collapsed. His lips found hers, and the world around him ceased to exist. There was only that kiss, passionate, forbidden, sweeping away all barriers. Somewhere in the back of her mind, Lisa realized that she was crossing a line beyond which there was no return. That she was betraying Ray, the man who loved her with all his heart, who trusted her unconditionally. But at that moment, those thoughts seemed distant and unreal. Only Brad was real. His hands, his lips, his whispers, and the storm of feelings that swept over her head, carrying her away from the quiet harbor of family life into the uncharted, dangerous, but so tantalizing waters of forbidden passion. Brad Cooper rubbed his throat irritably, swallowing a pill, the third of the day. This cough had haunted him for the second week, and it was not responding to any medication. In addition, he was constantly weak and feverish, as if his body was fighting an invisible battle. 8 months flew by like a day. After that rainy night, when all the barriers between him and Lisa collapsed, their secret meetings became regular. At first they pretended it was an accident, a tragic mistake that wouldn't happen again. But a week later, Brad was back in her arms, and it became impossible to deny the obvious. There was a feeling between them that burned both of them from the inside. Ray stayed in Grand Rapids, taking a permanent position as a construction foreman. He came home only on weekends. sometimes once every 2 weeks, immersed in his work and plans for the future. In recent conversations, he'd mentioned more and more the possibility of them moving to Grand Rapids. He'd already been looking at an apartment there, exploring neighborhoods, getting into the company's business. He said that in a couple months, he'd be ready to move Lisa in with him, to start a new life in the big city. Their little house in Riverdale was often empty now. Lisa had to fill in for a sick colleague at the salon, and she was working late. At least that's how she explained her delays. In fact, she spent many evenings with Brad. The car wash had become their sanctuary. After closing time, when the last employee had gone home, Lisa would arrive in her little blue Honda, an old car she'd inherited from her father. Despite its age and shabby appearance, the car was her little freedom, the only thing that reminded her of her old life. She always parked in the backyard, where she wouldn't be seen by casual passers-by. They had their own little area in the back room, among the stock of chemicals and tools. An old couch, a small table, a music center. Nothing fancy, but it was a whole world to them. For the first time in years, Brad felt he had found his happiness, although happiness with a taste of betrayal. Every time he met Ray at the pool table at Jenny's, he felt a prick of conscience. But as soon as he saw Lisa, all doubts receded. Now that this strange ailment hadn't gone away for 2 weeks, he was beginning to worry. Perhaps a cold or flu. The season was just beginning. But something told him it was more serious than that. He'd been ignoring the signs for too long. The constant fatigue, the night sweats, the unexplained weight loss. Shaking his head, Brad closed the car wash earlier than usual and headed toward the local clinic. Cheryl was on duty today. He'd seen her car in the parking lot. If anyone could give him sound advice without asking too many questions, it was her. Cheryl was finishing filling out the call card when Brad appeared in the hallway. His usually cheerful face looked gaunt, his eyes shadowed, and his movements lacked their usual vigor. She'd noticed the changes right away, a professional habit of spotting symptoms. "Hi." He tried to smile, but it wasn't very convincing. "Do you have a minute?" Cheryl nodded, pointing to the chair next to her desk. Over the last 6 months, she'd noticed a strange change in Lisa's demeanor. Her friend seemed younger, a sparkle in her eyes that hadn't been there in years. Lisa began to pay more attention to her appearance, changed her hair, updated her closet. Cheryl guessed the reasons, but didn't ask directly. Everyone was entitled to their secrets. But now, looking at Brad, she was beginning to connect some dots. "What's bothering you?" she asked, setting aside her pen. Brad described his symptoms: cough, weakness, fever, night sweats. Cheryl listened intently, her professional instincts telling her it could be something serious. Too many coincidences, too familiar a set of symptoms. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, keeping her expression neutral. "About 2 weeks, maybe more." Brad shrugged. "I thought it was just the flu, but it won't go away." Cheryl inwardly tensed. Of course, it could be any number of illnesses, from the common cold to tuberculosis. But given her own experience and knowledge, no, she couldn't make such diagnoses on site. "You need a full examination," she said firmly. "We don't have enough equipment at our clinic. Go to the county hospital in Grand Rapids. I'll write up a referral." "Is it that serious?" Brad was surprised. "Maybe just antibiotics." "No," Cheryl cut him off. "The sooner you find the cause, the sooner you'll get better." She wrote out a referral, labeling the necessary tests, including an HIV test. "Standard procedure," she explained to Brad. Nothing out of the ordinary. But there was an uneasiness brewing inside her. If her suspicions were confirmed, she couldn't even imagine the consequences. The white hospital corridors were dreary. Brad sat in line to see an infectious disease specialist, tapping his foot nervously on the floor. The results of the tests he'd taken 3 days ago were ready, and he'd been asked to come in for a consultation. Why an infectious disease specialist? This question kept bothering him. When he was finally invited into the office, Brad was already on edge. The doctor, a middle-aged man with a tired face, pointed him to a chair and opened a file of results. "Brad," the doctor began, and something in his tone made Brad cringe inwardly. "I don't have the most pleasant news." For the next 10 minutes, Brad listened like he was in a fog. HIV, positive. Need more tests to determine stage and prescribe therapy, high viral load, reduced immunity, possible complications. The doctor's words came as if from a distance while one thought pulsed through Brad's mind. How? How? He wasn't a drug addict, hadn't had any casual relationships in recent years. The only new person in his life in the last year had been Lisa. An icy wave of understanding swept over him. Lisa. Was she really her? But how? Why didn't she say anything? Maybe she doesn't know. Brad, can you hear me? The doctor's voice brought him back to reality. Yes, Brad answered hoarsely. I'm just, trying to comprehend. It's not easy news, the doctor nodded. But modern therapy can keep the virus under control. You can live a full life if you take the medication regularly. It's important to start as soon as possible. Brad nodded, mechanically accepting the prescriptions and pamphlets the doctor held out to him. A storm of emotions was building up inside. Shock, disbelief, fear, anger. Especially anger. If Lisa knew and kept quiet? Leaving the hospital, he got into his car and sat for a long time, staring into the space in front of him. The phone showed 2 missed calls from Lisa. She wanted to meet tonight at the car wash. Of course they would meet. He had a lot of questions. Lisa glanced nervously at her watch. Brad was already 40 minutes late, which was unlike him. He usually arrived even earlier than the appointed time, impatiently waiting for her to show up. She was about to call him when she heard the sound of a car pulling up. Something about Brad's gait alerted her. Normally he moved lightly, almost springily, as if ready to break away at a moment's notice. Now his steps were heavy, unhurried, as if each movement was difficult. Hi, she smiled, approaching him with the intention of hugging him. Brad pulled away, not allowing her to come any closer. His face was withdrawn, his eyes cold. We need to talk, he said, and the tone of his voice sent a chill down Lisa's spine. They walked to the back room. Brad remained standing, though he was usually the first to plop down on the old couch, pulling her with him. I went to the doctor today, he began without preamble. I have HIV. Lisa felt the ground go from under her feet. This couldn't be happening. Not now, when her life was finally coloring, when she felt alive for the first time in years. What? She squeezed out, trying to buy time. How is this possible? You tell me. Brad's voice sounded metallic. I haven't had any other contact in the last year, only with you, Lisa. She sank down onto the couch, feeling her knees weaken. Her thoughts raced frantically, searching for a way out, an excuse, an explanation. But there was none, only the truth she'd been hiding for so long. Yeah, she began, but the words stuck in her throat. Did you know? Brad asked bluntly, and it was clear from his tone that he already knew the answer. Lisa nodded slowly, unable to meet his gaze. How long ago? His voice shook with barely contained rage. 4 years, she replied barely audibly. 4 years, Brad exclaimed. And you kept silent? You knew and kept silent all that time? Lisa finally looked up. Brad's eyes were so disgusted that it physically hurt her. I was afraid, she whispered. Afraid I'd lose you, that everyone would find out, that Ray, Brad laughed bitterly. Poor unsuspecting Ray. My best friend, the one I betrayed, and you betrayed us both. Do you realize what you've done? Lisa began to explain that she'd contracted the disease from a salon client with whom she'd had a brief affair before her and Brad's relationship. It was after another miscarriage when she felt devastated and wanted by no one. Ray was then head over heels at work trying to deal with his own pain while she sought solace on the side. When the diagnosis was confirmed, she was terrified. She couldn't tell Ray. That would be admitting to cheating. She thought she could control the situation, that protected sex would prevent transmission of the virus. But you were wrong, Brad interrupted her. And now I'm paying for your mistake, for your lies. Please, Lisa pleaded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Please don't tell Ray. He won't be able to bear it. Me? Brad was outraged. Do you want me to keep your secret? You want me to look my best friend in the eye, knowing that his wife is not only cheating on him with me, but putting him in mortal danger? We can fix this, Lisa said desperately. I'll stop seeing you. I'll use protection with Ray. No one else will get hurt. It's too late. Brad shook his head. I've already been hurt. and I won't let the same thing happen to Ray. He deserves to know the truth." "No!" Lisa exclaimed, jumping up from the couch. "You can't! It would destroy him." "What about me?" Brad shouted. "It's already destroyed me. Do you realize that every day of my life is going to be a struggle? That I'll have to take medication for the rest of my days? That any relationship will be a problem?" They stood across from each other. She, with her face contorted with fear. He, with eyes full of pain and anger. Two people bound by a feeling that had now turned into a toxic mixture of betrayal, fear, and hatred. "I'm calling Ray," Brad said firmly, pulling out his cell phone. "Right now. He needs to know." "No, please." Lisa took a step toward him, trying to snatch the phone. "Give me time. I'll tell him myself, please." "There's no more time." Brad pulled away from her. "You've reached your limit of trust." He started dialing a number, and Lisa felt something inside her shatter. Her whole life as she knew it was ending right now. Ray would find out about the cheating, the sickness, the years of lies. He would never forgive. She'll lose everything. Her husband, her social standing, her job. In a small town, news like this travels fast. She'll be shunned, whispered about, pitied, unbearable. In desperation, she looked around. Her gaze fell on a heavy tire iron lying on the workbench among the other tools. A massive piece of metal that Brad used to remove particularly stubborn parts. Sometimes decisions are made in a split second. Sometimes one move changes a whole life. Officer Douglas Peterson squatted down, scrutinizing the dark stain on the concrete floor of the car wash. The blood had already dried, turning brown. Nearby were shards of glass chemical bottles, an overturned chair, and scattered tools, all signs of a violent struggle. Brad Cooper's body was discovered by an employee early in the morning. The young guy came to open the car wash and found the owner in the back room. A heavy tire iron, stained with blood, lay nearby. The murder weapon, it was assumed. Multiple head injuries indicated a furious attack. The killer didn't just hit to harm, he wanted to destroy. Such aggression usually indicates a personal motive, a strong emotional bond between victim and attacker. "Did anyone see any visitors last night?" Peterson asked a CSI who was photographing the crime scene. "The neighboring store closed at 6 o'clock, he replied. "After that, no one could see who came in. There are no security cameras here." Peterson nodded, making notes in his notebook. He didn't like this case. Murders were rare in Riverdale. The last one had been 5 years ago, a drunken brawl that ended in tragedy. But this was an elaborate, brutal crime. Someone wanted Brad Cooper silenced forever. "Officer," one of the techs called out to him, "you should see this." The technician was holding a plastic bag of documents. Among them were the results of Brad Cooper's medical examination from the county hospital. "HIV positive," Peterson muttered, looking through the papers. What a twist. The story was getting more complicated. What if the murder was related to that? Who knew about Brad's diagnosis? Who benefited from his silence? In a small town where everyone knows each other, secrets have a special value. And sometimes people are willing to go to extreme lengths to keep those secrets from getting out. Peterson took another look at the crime scene. Somewhere here, among the broken glass and bloodstains, the truth lurked, and he was determined to find it. Officer Douglas Peterson had spent his life on the Riverdale Police Department and was used to the fact that crime in the small town rarely went beyond petty theft, teenage vandalism, and drunken debauchery at Jenny's bar on Fridays. Brad Cooper's murder was out of the ordinary. Peterson's first thought as he surveyed the crime scene was robbery. A car wash is a cash business. Maybe Brad caught the thief and got hit with a tire iron. But the cash register was untouched, and records show that all of the day's proceeds were still there. Peterson, a 45-year-old man with deep wrinkles on his tanned face and graying temples, smoked his third cigarette as he stood in the parking lot of the car wash. Retirement was only 2 years away, and he'd hoped to spend them quietly, not getting bogged down in complicated cases. But now, the whole town was looking at him, waiting for results. "Anything interesting, Doug?" Sheriff Collins, a full-bodied man with a ruddy face, approached, breathing heavily. The sheriff spent more time on paperwork than in the field, and usually relied on his officers to investigate. "It doesn't make much sense yet," Peterson said, putting out his cigarette. "It doesn't look like a robbery, more like personal motives. Brad was beaten with rage several times. Someone was very angry. Did he have any enemies? The sheriff asked, even though they both realized that no one in their town could have any real enemies. Brad was his own guy, Peterson shrugged. Maybe he owed someone a favor? I heard he had a gambling problem. Check all his contacts. The sheriff patted Peterson on the shoulder. I'm relying on you, Doug. I don't want this case hanging unsolved. Bad for the town's reputation. Peterson nodded. He had a long job ahead of him. He'd have to start with Brad's closest social circle, and first on that list was his best friend, Ray Johnson. Cheryl Diaz fidgeted with the papers on her desk. Ever since the news of Brad's murder had spread through the town, she'd been at a loss for words. She knew something no one else knew, about Brad's diagnosis, about his last visit to the clinic, about his condition. Doctor-patient confidentiality was sacred to Cheryl. Even when she had received her own diagnosis of HIV infection years ago, it had been the assurance of confidentiality that had helped her cope with the initial shock and fear. But now the situation was different. Murder, and possibly a connection to Brad's diagnosis. She couldn't shake the thought that her silence might interfere with the investigation. And there was another disturbing detail: Lisa. Cheryl had long suspected a connection between her friend and Brad. Too many coincidences, too many oddities in Lisa's behavior. And now that Brad was dead... The ringing of the doorbell interrupted her musings. Officer Peterson stood on the doorstep, his serious face not boding well for a pleasant conversation. Cheryl, he nodded at her. I need to ask some questions about Brad Cooper. She led him into the house, feeling the resolve building inside. Protecting doctor-patient confidentiality is important, but solving a murder is more important. Brad came to see me last week, she began as they sat down in the small living room. He was having health problems. I've sent him to county hospital for a full workup. What kind of problems? Peterson pulled out a notebook, keeping her gaze fixed on him. Cheryl took a deep breath. I'm violating doctor-patient confidentiality, but I think it's important to the investigation. Brad had been diagnosed with HIV. He found out just the day before he died. Peterson raised his eyebrows in surprise. That's interesting. We found his test results at the car wash. Do you have any idea how he might have gotten infected? I can't say for sure, Cheryl answered evasively, though she had her guesses. But I do know that such a diagnosis is a severe emotional blow. Brad could have been in conflict with someone he was close to. Peterson jotted something down in his notebook, and Cheryl noticed his gaze lingering on a photograph on the mantelpiece. Her and Lisa at last year's town festival, smiling, embracing each other. You're friends with Lisa Johnson, aren't you? As if, by the way, he asked. Cheryl tensed. She could only guess how much Peterson already knew or suspected. Yes, we're friends, she answered cautiously. What can you tell me about her relationship with Brad Cooper? At that moment, Cheryl realized she was at a crossroads. One word could change the course of the investigation. One word could ruin her friend's life. But hadn't Lisa ruined her own life with her own hands? I think you should talk to her directly, Cheryl finally said. I can only tell you what I saw, and what I've seen is that in the last 6 months or so, Lisa has changed a lot. More, alive, happier, and I don't think it had anything to do with her husband. Peterson nodded slowly, taking note of her words. Thank you for your candor, Cheryl. It may prove to be important. When he left, Cheryl stared at the picture with Lisa for a long time, feeling an emptiness growing inside. She hoped her suspicions were wrong, but deep down, she already knew the truth. The Johnson house was quiet when Peterson pulled up. Ray had returned from Grand Rapids as soon as he learned of Brad's death. Peterson had summoned him, feeling it necessary to deliver such news in person rather than over the phone. Ray opened the door, and Peterson was struck by the change in his appearance. Always fit and energetic, Ray now looked gaunt, with eyes red from sleep and stubble on his cheeks. Doug, he gestured for the officer to come in. Any news? The investigation is just beginning, Peterson replied as he walked into the living room. But I need to ask you and Lisa some questions. Lisa is lying down. Ray shook his head. She's very worried. She and Brad were good friends. Peterson noted the wording to himself. Good friends. How good is the question? When was the last time you saw Brad? He asked, pulling out a notebook. About 10 days ago, Ray rubbed his forehead, remembering. Before I left for Grand Rapids, we played pool at the bar. It was business as usual. He was joking around, making plans to expand the car wash. Did he mention any problems? About conflicts with anyone? Ray thought for a moment, then shook his head slowly. No, nothing like that. Brad never had any enemies. Yes, he might have had an argument with someone, but he'd forget about it the next day. What about the debts? Peterson continued. We heard he had a gambling problem. He did, a couple years ago. Ray nodded. But he got over it. At least that's what he said. Their conversation was interrupted when Lisa appeared in the living room doorway. Peterson looked at the woman carefully, trying to discern what was behind her pale face and eyes swollen with tears. Officer Peterson. She nodded weakly in greeting. Mrs. Johnson. He stood up. I'm sorry for your loss. I know Brad was a friend of your family. Lisa only nodded, as if she didn't trust her voice. She sat down next to her husband, and Peterson noticed that Ray made no attempt to take her hand or support her in any way. It was as if there was an invisible wall between them. Lisa, Peterson began softly, when was the last time you saw Brad? Yeah, she stammered, glancing at her husband. I don't remember exactly. I think he came by to check the roof last week when Ray was away. What day exactly? Tuesday, maybe, she answered uncertainly. Or Wednesday, I don't remember. How long did he stay with you? Not long, Lisa said quickly. An hour, no more. Just looked at the roof and left. Peterson wrote down her answers, noting the nervousness in the woman's demeanor. Sure, the death of a friend was cause for stress, but there was something else in her gaze, in the way she avoided looking at him directly. And the day he died, Friday, you didn't see him? No, Lisa answered firmly. I was at home all evening, alone. Ray called around 9 and we talked. That's true, Ray confirmed. I called her from work to tell her I'd be in Grand Rapids until Sunday. Peterson nodded, pretending to be satisfied with the answers, but inwardly he noted that no one could confirm Lisa's alibi. She had been home alone the night of the murder, and her car, an old blue Honda, might well have gone unnoticed in the dark if she had driven to the car wash. One more question, Peterson said, turning to Lisa. Brad didn't tell you about any health problems? Any medical diagnoses? He noticed Lisa flinch, and for a split second her face contorted in fear or surprise. But she quickly pulled herself together. No, nothing like that. She shook her head. Why? Just gathering information, Peterson replied evasively. Thanks for your help. I'll contact you if I have any more questions. Already sitting in the car, he reviewed his notes. His intuition, honed over 20 years of service, told him that Lisa was hiding something, and that something could be the murder of Brad Cooper. Peterson spent the next few days gathering information bit by bit. He interviewed car wash workers, Brad's neighbors, regulars at Jenny's. A picture began to emerge, and it wasn't what he wanted it to be. The night janitor at the bar had seen Brad and Lisa leaving the establishment together about a month ago when Ray was away. They held hands and then got into Brad's car and drove off. The old fisherman, whose cabin stood not far from the car wash, had noticed the blue Honda parked at the back door more than once in the evenings. The girl cashier at the supermarket remembered Brad buying champagne and candy, jokingly saying he had a date with the most beautiful woman in town. But most important was the testimony of a young mechanic from the car wash. He happened to walk into the back room after hours a couple weeks ago and caught Brad and Lisa in an unambiguous situation. Brad had made him promise to keep quiet, and the guy had kept his word until now. A whiteboard appeared in his office at the police station, where Peterson was mapping out the connections between those involved in the drama. In the center is a picture of Brad Cooper. Next to it, Lisa and Ray Johnson. With threads, he connected the names, adding notes: affair, HIV+, no alibi. Peterson's theory was taking shape. Brad and Lisa were having an affair behind Ray's back. Brad found out he was HIV positive. Perhaps he contracted it from Lisa. Maybe she knew about her diagnosis but didn't tell him. The fight, the accusations, the threats to tell Ray, and then murder. But suspicion wasn't enough. He needed proof. And that's when Peterson got lucky. Forensics found a fingerprint on the tire iron, the murder weapon. A clear, well-preserved print that didn't belong to Brad. It was matched to the database, and it matched Lisa Johnson. Peterson got a warrant to search the Johnsons' house. In the house, he found a stash of drugs, the same drugs used to treat HIV, and in a desk drawer he found Lisa's diary, where she described her meetings with Brad, her fear of being exposed, her despair after learning that Brad was ready to tell Ray everything. That was all he needed. The rest was a matter of technique. Lisa sat in the interrogation room, nervously rubbing the sleeve of her blouse. Across from her sat Officer Peterson, his face impenetrable. "Tell me what happened that night, Lisa," he said calmly. "I've already told you. I was at home, alone." Her voice sounded muffled, lifeless. "We have witnesses who saw your car outside the car wash." Peterson was counting on a reaction. "We have your fingerprint on the murder weapon. And we have motive." Lisa looked up at him with eyes full of despair. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He was going to ruin everything. My whole life." "Tell me," Peterson repeated softly. And she did. About feeling trapped in a cage in a small town. About getting her diagnosis 4 years ago, after a brief affair with a visiting client. About the fear of telling Ray, who would never forgive cheating. About how her affair with Brad had begun, giving her a sense of life, of freedom, of joy. "I loved him," Lisa admitted, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I really did. But when he found out about the diagnosis, everything changed. He was furious, said I'd ruined his life, that I was a monster, threatened to tell Ray everything, embarrassed me in front of the whole town. And you decided to stop him," Peterson finished for her. Lisa nodded, her shoulders slumped from the weight of the confession. "I just wanted to talk to him, to convince him to keep quiet. But he was so angry. He was yelling, throwing things. He said I deserved whatever was going to happen to me. And then he started dialing Ray's number. And I grabbed the first thing I could get my hands on." Peterson listened to her confession, realizing that behind the crime was not cold calculation, but the desperation of a cornered man. That didn't justify the murder, but it did explain it. "Lisa Johnson, you are under arrest for the murder of Brad Cooper," he said formally as he handcuffed her. She didn't resist. Relief seemed to come with the confession, as if the weight of the secret was scarier than the prospect of prison. 6 months had passed since the day the small town of Riverdale had been rocked by the murder of a car wash owner. Life was slowly getting back to normal, though the scars of the story had left on many. Ray Johnson sold the house and moved permanently to Grand Rapids. He rarely showed up in Riverdale, and when he did, he tried not to meet anyone. He did not attend Lisa's trial, refusing to testify in court. It was rumored that he had started dating a co-worker, but no one knew for sure. Lisa received 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 7 years. Her case attracted county media attention, not only because of the murder itself, but also because of the questions it raised about liability for HIV transmission. Cheryl Diaz continued to work at a local clinic, but now she was more open about her status, organizing a support group for HIV-positive people in the region. Her example has inspired many not to hide or fear stigmatization. Officer Douglas Peterson was promoted to detective, even though he was less than a year away from retirement. The Brad case changed his attitude toward the small town he thought was quiet and safe. Now he knew that beneath the quiet surface could lurk turbulent currents of human passions and secrets. Brad's car wash had been bought out by his cousin from a neighboring state. He had completely renovated the premises, erasing all traces of what had happened in the back room. But the locals still preferred not to wash cars there, as if the place was cursed. And at Jenny's bar, the pool table was now always empty on Fridays. No one wanted to occupy the place that had once belonged to 2 friends whose lives had been ruined by secrets, lies, and betrayal. In Riverdale, as in any small town, secrets could not be kept forever. Sooner or later, all secrets came to light, and the cost was sometimes prohibitive.